All right. All right, everybody ready? It's 5 o'clock. The meeting of the Germantown Board of Education work session is now in session. The first item of business is approval of grant of tenure to the recommended teachers. Ms. Stratton?
Good evening. On behalf of HR, we are bringing to you tonight the list of GMSD teachers who have met the requirements for tenure eligibility at the end of the 2019-20 school year. And so just to give you a little bit of background information on tenure, simply put, tenure is an employment status. So the teachers in GMSD are either on a probationary or a tenured status. And our tenured teachers do have the continuing employment opportunity year after year unless they're being dismissed with cause. In addition, our tenured teachers have what's called due process during discipline and dismissal cases. And while tenure eligibility requirements are outlined by Tennessee state law, the granting of tenure is a local school board decision. And so the GMSD teachers that we're recommending tonight for tenure consideration, they have served the required probationary status of working in a Tennessee public school for 5 years and have proven continued success as a classroom teacher by earning level of effectiveness scores of either above expectations or significantly above expectations for the last 2 years that LOE scores were available. And the way LOE scores or overall level of effectiveness scores are calculated, they are instructional evaluations plus your professionalism evaluations in addition to student achievement and growth measures. And so we have provided for your review, as well as the public, just a little handout that explains our procedures for how the names were identified this year, as well as the 19 individual teachers. And I thought it's important if I could read those names right now for you. So at Dogwood, Kelly Martins is the teacher that is up for tenure eligibility. At Farmington, the teachers are Rebecca Carey and Richard Coleman. At Forest Hill, we have Ashley Banks, Paige Browning, Corby Bonanno, I say that, yes, Catherine Crawford, Morgan Groh, and Pamela Welch. At Houston High School, we have Amanda Alsbrook, John Keenan, and Kevin Weaver. At Houston Middle School, we have Patrick Cook, Raymond Moses, and Hannah Robleski. At Riverdale, we have Lauren Misquita, Regina Witzel, and Beth York. And at the district office, we have Terry Schmitz, and he is an instructional technology coach. He's just based at the high school, but he works out at our schools. And so the Human Resources Department, along with the support of Superintendent Manuel, all 6 of our principals are excited to recommend to you the names of these 19 teachers who are eligible for tenure with GMSD. And at this time, Ms. Soph, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you or the board might have tonight.
Are there any questions? I'm just going to say thank you and congratulations to all of these staff members. Of all the things we get to do, this is one of the most joyful things we get to do as school board members. So thank you. And a special thank you, this is a wonderful summary, executive summary of tenure. So thank you for that.
Sure. I do just want to add, though, if the educators are granted tenure tonight, we will have a celebration at the May board meeting where these folks will come and be honored in person.
To follow Board Member Landers, it is one of the biggest roles that as board members we get to participate in, and from the monumental nature of this, it along with this time of year as we prepare for graduation, I'm so excited to see this list of names, and I look forward to celebrating them in May.
Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you, Ms. Stratton.
Okay.
Number 2 on the list is nominations for our 2021 TSBA Volunteer and Student Award nominations.
So as the board is aware, we feel like we set the bar for education in Tennessee and are proud of the work that all of our staff and students are completing, and we want to share that with the world. So here's one of those opportunities. So we are members of the Tennessee School Board Association, and so every year they have open nominations for Volunteers of the Year and also students. So I'd like to read what y'all see in your summaries. So this would be up for the board to vote on these individuals. Know that we've reached out to our schools and asked for nominations, and then the committee here then selected these individuals, and we think that they would represent us and have an opportunity to win. I think we haven't won since, I think Bonnie Lee was the last one that we had, and she was a great representative for us, and we feel like these individuals will do the same. So if you all will allow me, I'd love to read what's in our rationales. Each year, the Tennessee School Board Association recognizes rising senior students from across the state who have distinguished themselves in academics, community and service activities, and leadership roles and activities. Emma Grace is no stranger to the school board, as she serves on our student communications intern team. Principal Rob Taylor chose her after spending time serving on engagement committees with her, impressed with her leadership qualities as she represented the students of Houston High in all kinds of matters for the district administration this year. Emma Grace grew up in our school system. With both a mother and father who are school teachers, she has spent her entire life at our schools. Fascinated with the behind-the-scenes aspect of school, she's been an emissary of the student perspective ever since she can remember. As a member of the student intern team, she organizes social media for the district, features good teaching and learning in journalistic style for our website, and assists in event planning. Her favorite role, however, is advocating for her fellow students. She's a fixture in all engagement meetings, from the school calendar, grading practices, facilities master planning, to family engagement. More than just a committee member, she conducts research prior to each of these meetings and arrives prepared. Emma Grace runs an Instagram page where students can engage in quick surveys about days off from school, their grading preferences, and their ideas about future capital investments for the district. Often students find her one-on-one conversations in which they share their perspectives and ideas. She's a born presenter and relays these ideas back to our committees and administrators. This has been a valuable asset during the pandemic, as it's hard to imagine life as a teenager navigating the national crisis and attending high school partially from computer. Emma Grace is an excellent student with a 4.2 GPA, but told us she prefers to retain a well-balanced approach to school. While she takes a full roster of honors and advanced classes, she's made a conscious effort to spend time in her school schedule to explore different career pathways within our CTE programming. She's studying dual paths in health sciences and business communications. Emma Grace is also enrolled in the work-based learning course and spends each 7th period working at the school district in public relations and the community department. Outside of school, Emma Grace participates in the theater programs and roles both on and off the stage. This year, she was excited to take on the role of set designer for the spring musical. It was a great experience to lead a team of adult volunteers in constructing the set, she said. Emma Grace also volunteers a lot of time to support the theater programs at each of our feeder schools, running lights, assisting with choreography or direction. She's also one of Germantown's most sought-after babysitters. Children love her. At her church, Germantown Baptist, she was named a lead teacher at VBS and lead planned the kindergartners last summer. So we hope that the board will approve this nomination of Emma Grace Benzing. For the Volunteer Award, Kelly Yates was submitted by Houston High School. So each year, the Tennessee School Board Association recognizes school district volunteers from across the state who have distinguished themselves by demonstrating exceptional commitment to volunteerism in a local school district. And this is a hard one because we have so many incredible volunteers in our schools. But Kelly Yates has been described by several other parent volunteers, teachers, coaches, and administrators as down-to-earth, loyal, helpful, supportive, and giving. She is the founder and chairman of the Celebrate Our Seniors on the Houston High School PTSO, the president of the Houston High School Basketball Booster Club, the leader of the Houston Moms and Prayer Group, and a workhorse of regular school and PTSO functions. Over the winter holidays, she also organized a gift card drive for families and staff in need. The Celebrate Our Seniors Committee on the PTSO is a special interest work group that formed in response to the pandemic. And y'all, I think this is one of the reasons that she stood out, because she saw what our students were experiencing and she rose to that opportunity. So, Houston High School, let me get back to that, sorry. The PTSO regularly runs teacher appreciation events, but decided that this year they would run simultaneous events for the class of 2021. The group collected additional funds from community members and hosted giveaways and treats for the seniors each month. They are also working to host an unofficial senior picnic leading up to the graduation in May. Houston High School is coming off its most successful basketball season to date, and much to thanks that, according to Athletic Director Chad Becker, is in part due to the excellent parent support of Kelly Yates. She's completely selfless, he remarked when describing instances that she went above and beyond. As the president of a newly restructured booster club, Kelly oversaw communications and family relations on the team. Organizing travel and keeping parents in the loop could have been a full-time job on its own. The team traveled to Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, South Dakota, and New Orleans to provide national exposure to the state championship team. And that level of really competition that they experienced helped them win their state championship. This is Kelly's second year leading the HHS Moms in Prayers group. They meet every week to pray for Houston staff and families. The group also writes and delivers notes to those who have been prayed for. Because she is always at the school working on PTSO or booster-related business, she is poised to hear of the needs and relay them to the Moms in Prayers group. Kelly has also developed a relationship with the school counselors and has worked with them to anonymously collect and deliver gift cards to families in need. In short, said Principal Rob Taylor, she does a little bit of everything and is all around awesome. I don't know what we will do without her next year. Her youngest graduates this year, said PTSO President Sherry Sands. So we hope that the board will approve these nominations. We think that they represent our community and our school district well.
Any discussion?
I just appreciate the write-up. I'm glad that we're recognizing outstanding students and parent volunteers. I think that's a really good thing. So thank you for putting this together, and best of luck to them.
And for those who saw it, Emma Grace Benzing was in the musical that wrapped last night with Spelling Bee as Logan, and I'm not even going to attempt the last name because it was a long one.
Roblarski.
Yeah, something about that. But yes, it was, she's amazing. So she's not only involved, she's incredibly talented on the stage as well. I'm thrilled that we're nominating these two individuals. They are outstanding, and I love that we get to share them with the community. Anyone else? Let's move to number 3, annual review and revision of policies, first reading.
Ms. Abel, if you want to come on up. I think the first one that we need to look at is the promotion and retention policy. Is that the first one listed? .603.
Good evening. So in reviewing our promotion and retention policy recently, we realized that, we always compare it to the state policy, that the state policy has been updated, and we needed to update our policy to reflect so. So the changes that are highlighted in yellow don't begin until page 2. So everything on page 1 remains the same. It's aligned with the state policy. On page 2, we added in the section beginning with line 8 to include best practices for interventions as outlined by the State Department. So I could go through here in as much detail as you'd like me to, or we can just stop and go to questions on anything on page 2. And this falls under the retention consideration, because the promotion consideration. The policy is broken up into 2 sections, promotion and retention. So to be considered for promotion, we identify students as early as possible in the school year and start to put those intervention measures in place, because we don't want to say, oh, they're set for retention and obviously not do anything about it. So the whole first part of the policy is addressing what do we do once we've identified those who are at risk of not being promoted. So that's the whole second page there. And what's exciting about our summer learning camps is it does actually provide an opportunity for students who would have normally been retained because by the end of the school year they hadn't shown adequate progress. But through our summer camp, our hope will be that with the intervention that we provide over those 4 weeks, that we can help that student grow, especially if they were just on the cusp, or perhaps they just had some executive functioning issues with turning work in, and they need to be back in person. We found with some of our virtual students, particularly in elementary school and middle school, that they do need to have that in-person touch. So our summer camp will be in person, and we feel like with our best and brightest interventionist teachers that we can make a difference for these students. So that's where we begin with lines 28 on with adding the summer learning component.
And as I shared with the board, all of these come directly from the state school board policy. So they're picked up and placed exactly here. So it's the exact same wording and order and sequencing. This doesn't refer specifically to, and as we've talked about, and I know that as this board is opposed to the retention policy based on one assessment. That's not what this addresses. This just addresses that when a student is retained, it doesn't talk about the metrics that you use. And as we talk about, retention in and of itself is not a bad thing. There are cases where it's appropriate for students, but we want to make sure that we're using a full picture of a student's performance throughout the year and multiple metrics to make that determination. So this provides just one more opportunity for those students to display mastery of standards in order for us to promote them.
And this explains the communication aspect to parents in a timely manner. And if a student is retained, if the decision has been made, then it goes into the plan that will be developed along with that retention plan. Ms. Griffith, did you have a question?
That was my question, and when I spoke with Superintendent Manuel earlier, with those two notifications, that's no change. That time, the 15 days and the 10 days with the plan, that's just, that's nothing that's new. That's what's already existed.
Correct. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next policy that we have up that is for discussion, thank you, Ms. Sable,
Thank you, Ms. Abel.
is from Student Services, and I'll give a little background. We're very thankful to have a lawyer on our school board who's always looking out for us. But one of the things that we were discussing when we mentioned this policy last time was it talked about having a procedure manual for approving charter schools. And so we never want to recreate the wheel if there's already a good one already out there. So I asked Mr. Bland to reach out to Arlington and Ms. Speakman and say, hey, what procedure manual do you already have in place for your approval of charter schools? And in that process, when they were looking at that policy, they found that it needed to be updated also. And instead of having a procedure manual, there's actually a committee. So Mr. Blaine, I don't know if there's other things you want to share on this process.
Well, since I did not create the, revise the policy, you did not receive the yellow and red that you typically, so I just wanted to highlight a couple of the changes, and then I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that you have about the policy. But the first one that stood out was the different date that the application was due. Instead of April 1st, it's February 1st. And a lot of these changes are because the policy that we had was outdated. So it's been revised to reflect the current law and statute. Also noted in the new policy is that there is a 3% of annual, well, a fee is to be paid to GMSD as annually as identified as the lesser of 3% of annual per student allocation or $35,000. That's yearly per school that's approved. And also there's a $2,500 fee that's associated with any application per school that's submitted. And then the superintendent shall appoint a charter school review team to assist the board in evaluating and reviewing applications and make a recommendation to the board. Also, the renewal date has changed from October 1 of the year prior to the tenure agreement being ended. It's now April 1st of the year prior to the tenure agreement being ended.
And Ms. Landers, you had a question about the length of time, why it was 10 years. I did check and find out that is required by law to have that length of time there. That was not something that we would be choosing 10 years.
And then lastly, the new policy has a section that addresses amendments, which contains the deadlines and reasons for a charter school board to make an amendment to their application. And I'll be happy to field any questions you might have.
Mr. Bland, I didn't see in here about the fee. If the charter application is denied, is that fee refundable, or do we need to specify it as such?
That I can try to check into that quickly, but I'm not sure. I wouldn't think that it's refundable, but I can't speak on it for sure.
Ms. Estes?
Did we get the change on the fifth line? I'm sorry, the fourth line, religious should be religion. When I pulled it up this morning, it still was showing
Okay,
religious.
because
It's just,
I thought that when you sent it, I thought it said religion should be religious, and I was like, it does say religious,
No,
so, okay.
otherwise, it's
Okay,
religion.
so first paragraph, fourth line, instead of religious, we're gonna strike that and make it religion.
and then to Mr. Curry's question, I went through the statute, and I don't believe, and I've got it, and I'll check it in a minute. I don't think there's any provision for refunding the fee. I think it's to offset the work that's going to be involved by y'all in the committees that are formed. But I'll double check that real quick. I've got the statute with me.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Like I said, I just didn't know from an exposure standpoint if that was something, if it ever came up, if someone would say, hey, you denied me, I want my money back, and I just want to make sure we're protected on that if it comes down to it.
Yeah, I'm curious on line 5 on the page 3 of 6, where it says are you talking about the authorizer fee, that section? Or which fee?
Yeah, this will be line 25, page 1.
Okay. Yes, okay. Specifically around authorizer fee, that's if you approve them.
So what you're asking is, does it need to say non-refundable in front of amount?
Yeah, I just, with it being kind of ambiguous there, again, if it were to happen and there was a denial and we said, well, you're not getting your money back, they could say, well, your policy doesn't say that. So I just didn't know if we needed to button that up to protect us on that. But I defer to the attorneys in the room on that one.
Yeah, I'm curious, Ms. Estes, if you look at page 3, because that is talking about the authorizer fee. It says if GMSD becomes the authorizer of a charter school. I think that's once we give them the stamp. I may be reading that the wrong way. Then I think that would mean that they would have to pay that funding. But that's a flat rate, and lines 7 through 8 is a calculation. We'll check on that, Mr. Curry, and find out for you. Are there other questions? Okay.
Oh, do you have one?
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
just
good.
want to make sure, because I didn't see a spot in there pertaining to appeal, like, so it goes over apply, review, amendment, but I was trying to understand that if we get to a point where it does not, we don't feel it meets the criteria, and then if it has to go to that appeal process, this particular policy only talks about where we get up to that point. Is that my understanding? Did I miss something at the end? I just want to make sure.
They can amend their application.
So, but that's all it talks about is the amendments.
Yeah.
So regardless of approve or deny, once those amendments are done, then you continue to go through that process with the amendments after the initial application.
And then you guys deny or approve.
So that's all this is. Thank you for that clarification. I just, right there's.
Yes, I do not believe it outlines the next step for them to appeal to the state level of that board. So we'll check on those two things. So, Ms. Estes, if we can find out if we're required to notify them of the next step, you know that it just recently it passed that if our board denies a charter school, it then goes to the state. So we'll need to find out about notification procedure in case of denial.
On the fee. It just says you pay it.
So are we safe to not have non-refundable in there, or do you recommend we have the word non-refundable in there?
I would put it in. I'm always of the opinion more is better.
Right.
And if there's no confusion, I think that's a good catch on putting that in there.
Let's, Ms. Supermani, if everyone is in agreement, we'll make that adjustment to the policy that on, it's page 1, line, is it 25? Because I just closed that. Hold on. let's
And it
look.
may be on line 26. So you could say per proposed school as an authorizer, non-refundable application fee. So you could add it in between authorizer and
yes, that
application.
works. Yes. Line 26. Great. I think that's how it stands right now. Thank you. All right, I think we're ready for the next policy.
Okay. If there are no further questions on policies, we can move to number 4.
Well, do we want to look at special ed or service animals at
Sure,
all?
we can. I think most of those were housekeeping, Ms. Huffman. I think we
Okay.
were changing titles for the majority of those.
Okay, on the service animal one, I think Ms. Estes had an addition she wanted to recommend.
Okay?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, actually a deletion. On page 1, line 31, number 9, where it says the animal must be required for an individual with disability. I think if, we don't want to be in a position of putting in any child's disability plan a requirement for a service animal, because then if something happens to that service animal, in order for us to meet, I'm not saying you never would, but I would think it would be very, very rare that we would, as a school board, would take on that obligation and that huge expense. I have never seen an IEP that said, and by the way, we want to get some kind of dog or a horse. And I looked at about 6 other school special animal policy or service animal policies. I didn't see that requirement in any other policy. And I just think that, I just don't think it adds anything to our policy if it's, I don't think it hurts us if it's removed, but by leaving it in there, there could be an implication that if there's a service animal, we will put in the IEP that it is required, and then that's our animal and our replacement.
So let me ask, you're talking about line 31 on page 1?
Number 9.
Okay, see, because what I read it is that it would have to be an animal that was that the disability required, not us requiring it, but that that it had to be something that the disability required in order for us to accept it. Not the case?
I don't think it always will be the case, and I
Okay.
think
Yeah, because, I mean, we don't want, I guess my fear is if it is not a service animal that is required for that disability, we could kind of get anything.
yeah. on the other hand, we don't want to have it read that we are acknowledging that this animal is required.
Okay.
You know, we don't want to, it's not our requirement, okay? And so,
Yeah, that wasn't the intent, the way you're reading it.
Right, but I think her point is valid in that even though our intent might be one thing, which I agree with you, we don't want to be overrun with a plethora of animals that may or may not be required for the disability. We also don't want to take on the financial responsibility of having to provide an animal should something happen. And that is if it's included in the IEP as being a required item.
Yeah, these services aren't something that would be required under the IEP. This is just a state board policy adopted based off service animals. So the way it was written is not, this is my pal that's coming to school with me. There's a reason behind why I'm bringing. So for instance, a child with diabetes and a dog smells that the child's about to
right.
have a crash or something like that. So I'm up for suggestions if you want that to read different or.
And, I mean, I'm looking at the policy number 1, and any request has to be submitted to the office of the superintendent. So would that not be a point of clearing? I mean, like, at that point, you can assess whether that is a need, like a medical need or not. So would that eliminate the need for number 9? I'm just presenting that as a possibility.
Sure. I think the way that we were trying to phrase it was more that trying to define for the person who is wanting the service animal what that might look like. Like you can't bring your buddy. Like I want to bring my friend to work. But that it was a requirement of something as part of their disability. So
Can we find another word rather than required? Something more along that it's aligned with the disability, or it is
Prescribed?
prescribed, or?
Would that help, Ms. Estes? Would prescribed be better?
I think prescribed, because that's not the school's function. That would be the medical aspect of it, and that takes us out of it.
I wonder if before we do make any changes, because I noticed that the word required and then the words individually trained in line 33 are in quotations. And I don't know if that's something our office put or if that's actually referring back to a defined term in the ADA or that regulation at the top. And so I wonder if maybe we should look and see if that is what it's referring to, in which case you maybe will just say required as, defined in the regulation, something like that. I just don't know, but I just wonder if maybe we should check that before we change the language.
I mean, it seems that everybody's just trying to qualify what it means, and it's all about the language.
But I certainly don't want to be on the hook, put the district on the hook for service animals, because service animals are not inexpensive.
But you also don't want to open us up.
True.
It's a double-edged sword
The
here.
double-edged sword.
I'm looking at Maryville's policy on this. They've got, I kind of find it's interesting to look at different districts. I'm looking, they've kind of got it different, but on their district, it just basically says the district and its staff are not responsible for the care or supervision of a service animal brought onto district property or into district facilities by an individual with a disability. So I think something along the lines of that verbiage might work, but it might be worth looking at another district and just doing a lift and shift over if we find that simplifies it for us.
I think it's as much about providing it.
And when this was this taken from TSBA suggestion? Because
Yeah.
I know this was a big presentation about 2 years ago when this came through the legislature, so.
And I did look at several other board policies when I was reading it over, just to make sure it was still, there wasn't any changes since then. But, I mean, I'm happy to look at the wording. I'm sorry, I'm at a loss for a verb right now. That would,
I believe Mr. Strand's point is worth considering, is to make sure, since in both line 31 and 33, those are in quotes, before we go changing them, let's
okay.
clarify. But I do think prescribed is a good word.
I'm looking over a little later in our policy, Mr. Curry, and it states that the district is not responsible for the care or supervision. On page 2, starting in line 35.
Yeah, I don't know if that kind of alleviates the concern over the word required there.
I mean, that just mainly talks about care and supervision, whereas if maybe if we added the language that is not responsible for providing said animal, I don't know.
Or does the sentence, does it read better just saying the animal must be for the individual with the disability and just taking the qualifier out of it?
No, but
But it could
again,
be
it's who's
for-
providing, we go back to who's providing said animal.
The way it's been presented to me is this more falls under ADA and access than it does necessarily to IDA and IEP. So it's keeping, that's my way of thought, and there might be another school of thought. I'm not in disagreement in any way. But more defining kind of like with other programs. So you have to provide access to the building. Like we don't necessarily write in IEPs the wheelchair ramps because that's something you just have to do in order to provide access to the building. So this is kind of one of those things that falls under that. But if y'all want me to, I can do additional research and bring it back to the next.
What are the thoughts? Do we want to put this on hold? Since it is housekeeping, I don't know that
Well,
or we can address this
yeah,
part
if we-
and then
if-
address the next part next time.
yeah, if we could address the housekeeping pieces, that's all we really wanted to update. We will bring back to the board the clarification
Yeah.
and recommendations.
And I think we need to just be mindful of language because, whether, even if the intent is that one falls under ADA and the other under IDEA, litigation changes things and is expensive. Thank you, Ms. Huffman.
And thank you, Ms. Estes, for,
Yeah, always thinking to protect us. That's for sure. We'll get some clarity.
Are there any questions on the remaining policies? All right, let's move on to number 4 then. Budget amendments.
Number 4, we have 3 budget amendments up for the first one is to appropriate funds for the online school principal and secretary. So we are very excited that we are embarking on this process to offer an online school option for our families who want to choose that option next school year. But know that we are working through the plans, and in May we are going to share with the board and with the community what our online schools are going to look like, the enrollment process, course selection, everything that everyone's going to want to know, my mic wasn't on, about online school. So in order to do that, we want to go ahead, and this item, Budget Amendment 31, appropriates the funds for a principal and a clerical staff. This principal position, if the board approves it, will be a jack of all trades. And by that we mean they're going to be like a student services department. They're going to be dealing with registration. They're going to be like a counseling department in the fact that they're going to be meeting students' needs, looking at students' grades, making sure that they are progressing and getting the most out of their virtual school experience. So our goal is to go ahead and post this position and get this person on. As we discussed during the budget work session, this position right now would be funded from our reserve account just for the next 2 months. It'll probably be less than this amount because I think it's going to be difficult in order for us to post this position, have it open for that period of time. They may not get the full time that's listed here, but that would be the max amount that would be required. Once we have that position and we move into next fiscal year, this is one of the things that we're recommending providing for out of our ESSER funds, our 3.0 funds, is this virtual option for families. In order for this to become a fiscally neutral endeavor for the district, we have looked at allowing in year 2, year 3, expanding this to allow students outside of the district. And so we calculated around 20 plus students would pay for this salary and also the clerical position. So we can make sure that this virtual school pays for itself. And then everything else is built to scale. So when you look at students that are going to require a teacher, you're only staffing based on the students that are applying for the program. And we would set that teacher with the student ratios based on the enrollment. So we can control the function so that this isn't necessarily a large endeavor that we're spending money on and taking away from our normal operating procedure that we have now. So I'd welcome any questions about this position, but we would be excited to go ahead and post this in the next few days if the board approves this. Are there questions?
Questions? Okay.
Just add one, this might be kind of silly, but where would the virtual principal and secretary work from?
That is a very difficult question. We would be looking for office space either here at central office or at one of our schools. So obviously they're going to be a team that's together. So we would find them office space so they could be housed. One of the things that when we've done our research already with other districts that have offered virtual programs is they are going to do all the functions of a regular administrator at a school. They're going to play in prom. They're going to have dances. They're going to have events. They're going to have activities where they're going to be meeting with students and they're going to be engaging with them, but those are going to be off-site. But as far as their physical location, it'll be either here or at one of our schools where we can find the office spaces, the answer to that question.
Any other questions?
Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move on to the next budget amendment. Budget amendment number 32. As you are aware, the governor and our legislature appropriated money. And I want to be very careful of how we talk about percentages because it's never the correct amount when they get this reported a lot of times or when our elected officials speak. So we want to be clear that people don't have a false impression of what they're going to receive. The governor appropriated a 2% increase on the base teacher salary in the BEP component only for BEP allotted positions in a district. So if the board approves this, this money did come to us from the state government. We received approximately $256,000. They did tell us who it needs to go to. It needs to go to certificated staff, and that's staff that's certificated by the State of Tennessee Board of Education, and they also included nurses into that component. So they have prescribed for us exactly who gets this stipend. Know that when we have done the allocation and seen the amounts, it's about $450 for the individuals. Know that when we did a true 2% for our district last year, it was close to $900,000. I think it was 860 something thousand. So I think that's good for our community to know and our legislators to know. It's not a 2% for staff across the state. This is a mathematical computation that each district gets an allotment for this funding. So know that this budget amendment recognizes that increased revenue, and we are thankful for that, and we are passing it straight on to the people that they prescribed it for. So are there any questions on budget amendment number 32?
I should have asked this before, so you maybe could have looked it up. Do you have any idea of the number of our staff we have over and above the BEP provided?
We had done this calculation. It's over 100 staff members when we were doing this calculation, so I can find that out for you.
I don't need the
Yes.
precise. I just kind of wanted as an example that we are actually funding over 100 staff positions than we're actually provided money for by the state.
Yes, above those BEP, well over 100.
I have that conversation with people in the community often. I thought it was a great point that you made in our call earlier, going over this, that breaking that out for staff is really important because, again, we know the history of what we see in the newspaper, what we see on the news channel, and then what the reality looks like. And explaining that to folks as you break it down is very helpful. Not only, but the people that are actually going to see it on their pay stub, like, okay, but this went to this people. So I appreciate that, and I am mindful of what the district was able to do for staff across the board in the past, and especially after this past year. While I'm so excited that the nurses were included in this, I think that was something that the governor was like, yeah, that's important, but that just goes back to BEP funded, not everybody. So that is a great point that we have to continue to make and, continue to push for the funding that covers all the things.
As I watched the legislative hearings on these, there seemed to be, of these bills, it seemed that there was an insinuation that districts weren't passing all the money on to the teachers like we're supposed to. And so obviously we've laid it out here. I would encourage us to provide this information to Senator Kelsey and Representative White as they're the chairs to show that, hey, here's what you've said, here's the expectation level, but here's the reality. I think they need to see that, and I think they need to understand that we're not holding anything back, that we're following the letter of the law here. And while I'm happy that we're able to give, that the state is giving the teachers, pay action here, I think that the state kind of sets everything up for disappointment to say, oh, you're getting 2% when it couldn't be further from the reality here. But yeah, I encourage us to reach out on this to make sure that our legislators know what the reality on the ground is.
We agree, and we also talked about the communication that goes out to the individuals receiving this. So we will put that number of how many we're funding over the BEP in that, talk about the total amount of money, here's how it breaks down, here's the amount. So we'd already talked about that communication going out to the staff saying, here's what we got and here's how they told us how to spend it.
I know that some of us are going through the process of attending some seminars coming up about BEP funding, and I was very discouraged to hear some legislators, not locally, not local representatives, but some folks from across the state who during those conversations and hearings said that if we were spending outside of those positions, then we weren't managing the funds properly. I thought, oh boy. So I'd like to get that message loud across the state. But I do think that it's really interesting, and we all know that it just doesn't even, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So as we continue to advocate for that, just fully fund.
Yeah, to be able to provide those 100 additional positions is part of what makes this district what it is, and so it's a worthwhile. It's the investment we need to make, but I wish we could provide everybody that actual 2%, but the state did not provide that.
Yeah, I think a perfect example is the nurses. The fact that we have 7 nurses that serve our school district, and our BEP allotment only allows for 2 of those individuals that they're funding. That's a perfect example of just a microcosm of how we are funded above and beyond, and we could not function without having one in every single school to provide the services.
Any remaining comments or questions? All right. Ready for the next amendment?
Okay, the next amendment is retainage. So it is putting a bow on the Forest Hill project and central office. So know that as part of every project, and it's required by law, the city of Germantown has an account where they keep retainage. And so for every pay application that we receive, I believe it's 5% is held back. And this allows the district to hold the construction company responsible until we're finished with the project. Then once the project is complete, we give that retainage to the contractor, and then they pay that money to their subcontractors, whether it's masons or electricians or all the different trades that they had to create that school. So because we have now concluded all the dealings around the constructions of this project, we are ready to pay out the retainage, and that's what this budget amendment does. So If the board approves this, then we do the recommendation and the application to the city to then release that retainage funds to our contractors. This was the amount that's originally budgeted, so know that this is included in when we see those bids. This is that amount. It's not on top of what we'd already agreed to pay. So if there are questions on this amendment.
Well, I think we're ready to move on to number 5, fire alarm system replacement at Houston High School.
Mr. Cathy, if you join us.
Good evening. This is not the timing we would have recommended for this project, but we were kind of forced by an act of nature. So I'll talk about that a little bit in this item. The item before you for consideration this evening is the replacement of the entire fire alarm system in the main building at Houston High School. This is due to a lightning strike that took place at the high school. The lightning strike did significant damage to the system. The fire alarm system is the original one to the building. We did attempt to buy used parts on the secondary market for replacement. However, we immediately ran into compatibility issues and the system continued to experience failures. I don't want anyone to think the building is unsafe. The system is functioning to meet the minimum standards of fire code, but we continue to experience issues. The way we have achieved the system meeting the minimum requirements of fire code, it's not a question of if, but when that system will fail. We also continue to experience intermittent failures where we are putting temporary fixes in place until we can get to the end of this school year. The new system will be an upgrade and total replacement, including all devices, panels, wiring, duct detectors, horns, strobes, wall covers, pull stations. In short, a complete gut and replace of the existing system, in which we will also be adding voice evacuation in order to bring our fire alarm system at HHS up to current fire code and ADA compliance. If you've been in our newer buildings when there is a fire alarm event, there is a voice physically telling you to get out of the building. And that's current ADA and fire code. And we tried to get James Earl Jones or Morgan Freeman to do it, but we were not successful in them voicing over or get out of the building. This project, along with the rest of our fire alarm systems, is in our master facilities plan for fiscal year 22, but this one has been pushed up due to unforeseen circumstances. We are requesting to move it up to this summer for construction. You have a proposal from Johnson Controls in your board packet. This was procured through Sourcewell. Just a reminder that Sourcewell is one of our approved purchasing cooperative in which pricing has already been competitively bid and procured. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Cathy?
Yes, ma'am.
I believe Mr. Manuel mentioned in our conversation about this, this is the original system.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that it wasn't ready for today to be talked about financing it, but my goodness, here we are. That to me says a lot, and I'm really sad that there took a natural occurrence to make this happen. But at the same point, if we are able, I'm glad to bring it up to the current standards. That is really remarkable that it has continued to go and go and go.
And I did forget to mention too, and I should have mentioned this as part of my board packet, but we have informed our insurance carrier, the TML. We do have a property insurance claim in for this. We're hopeful that will be covered, but we haven't received official answer on yes, will it be covered in the amount. So we're still waiting on that. We're hopeful that will be covered, but we've had the claims adjuster out. We've walked the entire building. We've gone through all that due diligence process. We're just waiting for an answer. And
I was just curious, was there any other issue that's been identified as a result of that? I guess.
No, ma'am. Fortunately, not. It was a situation where after it happened, we just started to experience failures here, failures there, and when we started doing our due diligence and we brought out some experts, they immediately identified the problem, and then we started seeing the collateral damage.
Thank you.
So one of the questions I asked Mr. Manuel when we talked earlier about this, I think you answered it, but just help me understand. So normally when you present a project, you have a list of like a bid packet, and so in this case, I didn't see that. So this was bid. I just want to make sure we're not running afoul of our policy on it.
Sure, yeah. Sure, yeah, that's a great question. Now, we have numerous purchasing cooperatives that we're a part of. We use them routinely, and Basically, how it works is these items have already been competitively bid where Johnson Controls have said, we'll install duct detectors in this region of the country or this area for X dollars amounts. And this is really why purchasing cooperatives exist for a circumstance just like this. Some of these materials have a 4 to 6 week lead time on them, and our prime time to get construction of this nature done is during the summer when the students are not there. And we've got the additional challenges of the fact that when the fire alarm system is not functioning, you have to have a human being on fire watch that's keeping an hourly journal of occupants in the building. They're basically the human fire alarm in essence when they're on fire watch. So that's why we chose to go the purchasing cooperative route on this. It's April 19th today, and the kids are out, I think, the 21st. So by the time, assuming our board approves tonight, and with materials having easily 4 to 6 weeks of lead time, we don't want to miss our opportunity in the window to in the summer to get this done.
Okay, yeah, that's good. I just wanted to make sure that if anyone ever questioned, $500,000, that we followed a process on that.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to number 6.
Okay, we've had a full work session on our general fund budget. That will be my superintendent's report tonight is an overview of all the things in that budget that we see increases. I'll give you a brief mention right now. As you know, this was a lean budget for us because we're predicting no increase due to BEP funding. That is tied directly to average daily membership, and that's something that's a year in the rears. We're not seeing an increase. We actually saw a decrease in student enrollment, but we are not seeing a change in those numbers. So these changes we did see were due to sales tax. Sales tax has increased in this area. We saw an increase in our sales of devices, but know that the number one thing that we're funding through this budget are our promise steps for our employees that are part of their different pay scales. So no, I will go through this in depth with slides during our business meeting, but know that the board did have a work session. But I would be glad to entertain any questions on the general fund budget.
Does anyone have any remaining questions for the budget since the work session? Okay, Angela?
Not
Ms. Griffith?
technically on this budget, but since we've referenced so much to the upcoming funds, the ESSER funds that we will be receiving, do we expect that we will get together at another time planned when we know more of where we are with that?
So that may be something that we need to discuss, is to have an extended work session for this, because it is going to be a larger budget than we've seen in the past for our federal budget. That will be in May when we actually vote on that. So we'll discuss an opportunity for y'all to look at that budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Griffith. All right, and we'll move on to number 7, 10-point grading scale.
So as a district, we always like to examine practices and consider opportunities for students. How could we improve things, just to reflect on how we're currently operating. And thank you, Mr. Curry, for bringing this back to our attention. We did look at this. It was around 2017. But when we do initiatives, you reach a point where you have so many going on in one year that you need to do them effectively and concentrate on those few. So at that time, we were actually looking at the Law Day policy, among some other things. So we're back to looking at the 10-point grading scale. And what we have up here is our current grading scale over on the left, which you're probably very familiar with, and that is also known as the HOPE Scholarship Scale, or the Uniform Grading Policy for the state of Tennessee. So when we refer to HOPE Scholarship GPA, this is the scale that's used to determine the letter grade. And on the right is just a sample 10-point scale. When you look across multiple districts across Tennessee or across the United States, there are a variety of 10-point scales. So this is just one of those sample scales. And so as we're reflecting on why should we change scales, perhaps a better question is, why shouldn't we? So if we keep our students at the focus of what we're doing and what's best for them, I have to stop and think, why shouldn't we change it? How did it come about in the first place? Why do we have this grading scale? So when we look at the history of of our previous grading scales. So way back, I remember teaching when we had the legacy Shelby County grading scale, where the lowest A was a 94. I'm not sure where that came from. And the lowest B was an 86, and so forth. And there were multiple grading scales across the state. So when Tennessee enacted the Hope Scholarship in 2004, there was a realization that if we're going to have a scholarship that's statewide, well, we obviously need a uniform grading scale. So at that point, they enacted what is known as the Hope Scholarship GPA set, and that's what we currently use to this day. And in state policy, it does say that and so that's just a perception we would need to address. Also, like I said, we'd have two dual grading scales. So rather than looking at these as arguments, I kind of see these as challenges. Challenges in just clearly communicating what are the differences in the two grading scales. How would we identify it on the transcript? We already do that for students who transfer into our district from a different school with a different grading scale. We have their grading scale denoted for those years on their transcript. So we would do the same thing with this potential change in a grading scale. And as far as lowering standards, we're certainly not a district who would ever lower our standards, and we found that in other states, such as North Carolina, when they enacted their 10-point scale, that discussion can clearly be explained through teachers can examine their grading practices, which is what we're really emphasizing this year through our grading practices focus group. This is a good time to stop and say, what is an A? What does it look like? And change it to a 90 to 100 scale and adjust your grading accordingly. And so forth from an 80 to an 89. What does a B look like? What is that level of demonstration of mastery of standards? So the argument against, I can flip it over to the argument for. So also in our research, according to the National Center for Education Statistics, the most common grading scale found on high school transcripts is a 10-point scale. So our college admissions counselor talks to multiple college admissions counselors across the United States, and the 10-point scale is the most common that they deal with. In fact, they've asked her, y'all don't have a 10-point scale. A lot of the students that come to our schools do have a 10-point scale. So we're finding that we're more in the minority with the scale that we have. Like I said, we receive so many transfer students, whether it's from out of the country, within the United States, and the counselors and the vice principal, which is what I used to do, spend time transcribing those transcripts, analyzing what the grades are, and they keep the current grading scale they had from their previous school. So it actually, in my mind, makes more sense to have a level playing field. And if we have a lot of surrounding schools, private schools, other schools in the area on the 10-point scale, then maybe we should consider that for our students as well. Not to mention, to me, probably the number one reason to consider this would be money in the pockets of our students, providing more opportunities, opening up doors for them to go to a university that they might not be able to go to without that GPA. So an example that we have is Alabama has automatic merit-based scholarships based on GPA, but you have to have a GPA of 3.5. So that's to get their automatic merit-based. So if we had a student with a 3.3, obviously at Houston High School, that's a solid GPA, if they're especially if they're taking, rigorous classes. So there's a chance that moving that to the 10-point scale, that student would have a 3.5, and looking at their scholarship money that's automatic in their pocket, $20,000 a year, just by having that 3.5 GPA. So, like I said, it wouldn't be a matter of lowering the standards for our students. It would be a matter of reflecting on our grading policies and adjusting our grading scales to hopefully provide those opportunities for our students to excel and earn more money for their college of choice. So in the research that you have, I believe this is in your district update that you received, your handouts. We looked at Bartlett City Schools. They do have a 10-point scale. They transitioned in 2017 to that. And speaking to them, they said the only obstacle they encountered in the beginning was communicating the differences. So we would just have to be very proactive in communicating what is the Hope scale versus our weighted or unweighted GPA scale. Williamson County has a similar scale. It's not 10 points. I think 91 is their A, but it's a similar grading scale. And then some of the states that we ran across, South Carolina, North Carolina, and you can see some of the things that I've already discussed about addressing, are we going to lower our standards? Well, if you build rigor into the curriculum, then it takes care of itself. So it's good to look at the research that's already been done from districts who have switched. So what's going on in Tennessee? If you have followed any recent bills that were under consideration, as recently as March, just last month, this bill was on the table, or being considered to be brought up, to move to the 10-point scale across Tennessee. In other words, to change that HOPE GPA scholarship scale to this one, the 10-point scale. And in doing so, of course, that would have a fiscal impact on the state because more students would qualify for scholarships likely, which would lead to more money needing to be set aside. So it actually, if we go to the next slide, you can see this has been under consideration for several years. For 2 years, proposed by Hodges and Powers. It made it through multiple committees in 2020. Looked like it was going to go on and pass, but it had to be set aside right at the time COVID hit because all bills had to be directly related to COVID. So in Tennessee, they've already started making a move toward this, and we're not a reactive district. We like to be proactive, and if this might be coming down the path anyway, it's certainly good for GMSD to consider moving to a 10-point scale. So what are our next steps? So we recommend that the board consider adjusting the GMSD policy, the grading policy, to a 10-point grading scale for grades 6 through 12 on the grounds that increases scholarship opportunities for students. That's like our number one reason for wanting to switch. But that's contingent upon, of course, getting more input, stakeholder input, further engagement of students, teachers, and parents, further analysis by staff to determine the timeline and implementation for this, exactly how would we change this over in Skyward and get this on our transcripts and report cards. And then, so we would also like to consider the timeline for our implementation. We really would need to consider changing the policy in May so that we could give our teachers adequate time to make changes to the way they're going to grade next school year. So those are our overall recommendations. And we're, go to the next slide again. You can see the grading scales that we had originally, our current scale versus potential 10-point scales. So
as you're aware, something as substantial as this, we always like to engage our stakeholders, talk to our students, talk to our parents, and talk to our teachers who are going to be those boots on the grounds and administration implementing these changes. So we'd like to have this next month to really look at that and then bring a recommendation for you, exactly ironing out the details when we move forward. So at this time, we'd love to offer it to comments. And Mr. Curry, thank you for bringing this to our attention. It looks like you've done some analysis too that supports what we are looking at.
Yeah, first off, I want to thank you for indulging me on this. As I mentioned last month, looking at the grading scale, I saw an opportunity, like the door was open for us to be able to try to go and take a look at this. I appreciate the hard work you did researching it. I will say, obviously, I'm for this. And I appreciate the board's consideration. I kind of did just a little sample student. I went through the Houston course catalog, and I pulled up just the courses that were there, and I put the grades that maybe I thought I would have made. I had to think back. I had to think back a little bit. But I wanted to do a comparison, and you saw the scales in the presentation for Bartlett, Brentwood, and Houston. Bartlett, obviously, we compete with them locally. Brentwood, that's a school that I think we compete with at a statewide level, and then obviously Houston. And I just put the number grade down, but you can see, and I did, just for a point of clarification, I believe that we still should have the points for AP and for honors, so I don't think there should be any change there. I just think just sliding the scale, I think, is something that's beneficial. But you can just see the difference there between a student with the same number grades at Bartlett versus Brentwood versus Houston, and you can see that we're at a pretty significant competitive disadvantage. So a student taking the same classes, same grades, 3 different districts, a student at Bartlett High School comes out with a 4.36 versus a Houston student with 3.64. And so when you start talking about local scholarships, I went through and Googled and just, Memphis area scholarships. Well, they don't do scale adjustments. So the Memphis Horticulture Club, they're going to give a scholarship, and if GPA is one of the considerations, they just look at what it is, and you see right out of the gate that our Houston students at a competitive disadvantage. I also think that changing the scale, I think encourages students maybe, they're concerned about, you have a student that's really concerned about straight A's or whatever, and they don't want to get out of their comfort zone and maybe take a class that they're interested in, but they're, scared of failure, and they don't want to get that B. So maybe they take an AP Spanish class, or maybe they take, a chemistry or a class that's of interest to them, but they've been afraid to take the plunge because they don't want to risk a lower grade. So even though it's 3 points, that 3 points could be the determining factor whether or not they enroll. So I think this encourages our students to take a broader variety of courses that are in their interest rather than trying to go for, trying to hone in on that GPA. And I get why they do that, but I think we have a great variety of course offerings, and I'd like for them to be able to take advantage of that. And I know that there's some work on the grading system, so I don't know where this coincides, but I was thinking at the elementary level. So right now, on a 10-question quiz at the elementary level, you miss one question, you get a B. Is that really realistic for our elementary students? I don't think so. I mean, you're saying you have to score 100 on a test just to get an A. And so I think that this gives some flexibility at that level also. So I appreciate your indulgence and your consideration on this.
Ms. Abels, I just wanted to thank you and your staff for the extensive research. I look forward to getting to sit down and really delve into it. And your recommendation would be to look at implementing this for grades 6 through 12
Yes.
for the coming school year?
Yes, for the upcoming school year. So
And
grades
that-
K through 2 are already standards-based, and we are spending a lot of time, teachers are teaching our teachers in K through 5 across the board to implement standards-based grading. So next year, we're really digging into what does that look like in the grades 3 through 5. The PLC work will be focused on norming their grading practices, using the rubrics that are standards-based. So we could see a long time trend of moving towards standards-based in 3 through 5. So if we did decide as a district to update the policy, whether we take it down to 3rd through 5th, that's neither here nor there, other than it's an additional change that they would have to go through if they shift to standards-based. So K through 2 has been standards-based for several years with those report cards. And
So, Mr. Carey, we share your concern about, you gave the elementary example. So the goal is to move to something in K5 that looks like what we're currently doing in K2, where it's not a number, it's not a measurement like that, it's more of a mastery of standards. So what you would see is the 10-point grading scale and then a standard scale, and so they just flow from one to the other. So, but that's a transition period that we're looking at.
So would it be possible for that transition period? I mean, is it unrealistic to ask them to move down and go to the 10-point scale in the interim? I don't know what the time frame for the changeover is. So like I said, I just would offer that we might just go ahead and do it for 3 through 12, if that's possible, if it makes sense.
so that could be part of our engaging in conversations with teachers and administrators. We could see 3rd through 5th grade, how feasible they thought it would be to adjust to a new grading scale and then go to standards-based. We can get their input.
So is my understanding that we're looking at potentially going to standards-based at K through 5 in 2 years? Okay. So what we're looking at is a change and then another change for 3 through 5th.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to hear from teachers about what their preference would be if maintaining status quo for them for just one more year while they're getting their grip on what's coming in the following year is what they prefer, or if they think consistency is across the district is more desirable. I think getting their feedback is essential there.
I agree.
I remember our discussion in 2017 about this possibility, and we were going to let Bartlett be the guinea pig. So thank you, Bartlett, for being the guinea pig. And they have obviously been successful in pulling this off. I'm excited about the possibility. having gone through, like Mr. Manuel, the college selection process, and knowing how painful it can be to write a check to college. Any help that we can provide parents and students to relieve some of that is positive, and I agree with you, it does not diminish rigor. Teachers aren't going to change what they expect of students. It's just we're acknowledging how hard our students are working and rewarding that adequately on a level playing field with the rest of the United States. So I'm excited about looking at this. Implementation-wise, I was glad to hear you say currently on transcripts with transfer students, we have that clearly defined on transcripts, because I was concerned that we would try to kind of grandfather it in, but I knowing that high school classes are frequently a mix of grade levels, I saw that as being very challenging. So I'm assuming from what I'm hearing, once the change is made, it is change for all.
Yes.
6 through 12, no matter where you are, at that point, we're starting at 9
At that
to 10
point forward.
scale. And it would just be clarified on the transcript that
Yes.
pre-2021 is this scale, and excellent. That alleviates some of my concern that there could be tension for parents and teachers trying to figure that out as well.
Yeah,
But-
everybody will take advantage,
Just-
even if you're midway through your high school experience, it's just
Right,
going to have
from
both.
here on, it's this. Got it. Thank you very much. And thank you for the excellent research. It's good to know, like we have learned, I think, in the National School Board Association meetings, it is so good to know what's going on nationally to help us inform our decisions better as we move forward, because we're competing on a national scale. We're not limiting ourselves to just what's going on in Shelby County. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, and thank you for your research as well.
I just want to say thank you very much, because this topic has come up several times, and I appreciate you pointing out that when there are a variety of things that are initiatives being implemented, that sometimes I guess the timeline and as to which we go down that road is there's a strategy sometimes to that, and also not to do too many things at once, because I know that this is something in the community that gets asked to us all the time, and understanding that perspective, and knowing that a couple of us have been through the college process with their own children, and it's been very interesting to me to ask them questions and your predecessor about that, process and learn more about that. But I think that, as Mr. Curry has continued to say, and I'm glad that you point out just the scholarship opportunities, but as Ms. Chairman Oaf just mentioned, our comparison is vast, and it's not just right here. And understanding that we can show those differentiation, or that differentiation on through Skyward and on the report cards, and and as long as we communicate it, we're going to talk about grading policy in the future too soon, and I'm going to have plenty to say about that. Having served on that committee, as you know, but I think that it's mostly important, and I just want to make sure I understand what I'm hearing, is that we are going to solicit feedback from parents, from students, from staff, and make sure that everybody understands what this actually means, so that we can, when it's go time, when and if that time comes, hopefully soon, that we're able to explain and promote in a very positive way. I see it as very enlightening, and I think that it's going to be our responsibility to be part of that promotion of it, and I look forward to that.
Exactly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Abel. I think that's all the questions. All right. Number 8 is further business, and I believe Ms. Griffith has an item of further business.
I do, and I'm looking at the time, and I'm like, oh my goodness, fast talking. It's very important, but it's also something that doesn't take a lot of time to talk about, but I'm going to do a quick history on this because it's something that's very important to me, near and dear to my heart, and I'm going to bring it up yet once again, having a wonderful conversation with the superintendent about this, and then want to thank everybody in this room for participating in the recent NSBA convention. Although we were so sad to not be in New Orleans together with fellowship and probably a lot of good food, we were able to join it virtually. And I was so impressed by our back and forth banter about the different sessions that we all went to and attended, and how we're bringing things back to the group as a result of that learning experience. School board member, student board member, seat at the table for our largest group of stakeholders, to me, is something that we owe not only to our board in our district, but mostly to our community. We talked a lot about it in the strategic planning session end of last summer, beginning of the fall, and we talked about a couple of different aspects of that. But it is something that I think that after having participated in a few different sessions, I just have heard from other boards around the country how beneficial it is to get that perspective of the student and have that person participate in that way. And so I would like to see us consider something as early as maybe next month as to how we can prepare for the fall to go through that process. I welcome any feedback or thoughts on that today or in the future, but I can't tell you how we've come full circle. And after this past year, there is no doubt in my mind that input and perspective will only benefit the progress of our district in the future.
I've been long on record supporting that viewpoint, so I've just for the issue we just discussed, the grading scale. How great would it be to get student input, just to have that right there to say, hey, as a student, what's your perspective? I think that the voice of the student is something that is, I mean, we can only benefit from that, just to have that perspective. I know that there's been some misconception in the community that people think that they're around to make, vote. There's no voting, but I think having that voice is something that's very important. It's near and dear to my heart, and I appreciate Ms. Griffith bringing that up, and I hope that that's something that we can look at as we go forward.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for us, what we would ask, I fully support this. I think it would also be an incredible opportunity for our students. So what we would like to ask of the board is what framework you'd like that to look like. So we've talked about different ways that this could work, whether it's a rotating position, is it an elected position at the school level, is it a nominated position? If it's nominated, who nominates? So if y'all will provide us that guidance, then we will make sure that we have that representation for you.
One of the sessions I attended at NSBA actually spoke specifically about having a student representative on boards. This actually came from the Alaska Association. Was a fascinating presentation. They provided access to almost a workbook of how to start doing that. So with the board's indulgence, I would like to share that out with you. And then if you don't mind, I could discuss with Mr. Manuel what that might look like, and then bring it back to you all in May to discuss the outcome of that. Is that all right with everyone? Are there any specific concerns you have now that you would like to make sure we address in that discussion ahead of time? Because because we're going to vote on it, this isn't something we can discuss outside of sunshine law. So,
No, I think personally, I'd like to take the time also to do some research with different school board members across the country, pros and cons on having a student on board. I've chaired boards with students on them, and they're great contributors. But it's all in the words and how you put it on paper. So.
And recognize you can also, if you do your research and after you've reviewed some other boards' opportunities, you can share that with Mr. Manuel, and then we can, Mr. Manuel and I can work together to create something that hopefully we can enact this fall, if approved by the board, if so approved by the board. Does that sound like a good plan of action to everyone here? Mr. Strain?
It does. Would we discuss it at a work session before? Okay, just.
We would discuss it if we bring it at the May, we would bring it at the May work session, potentially. If Mr. Manuel and I, find the right pathway by that time. Is everyone in agreement?
I've been researching it for a long time, as you know, and I still have plenty of questions myself, so I'm looking forward to it, and whatever everybody can come up with to have a good discussion. I'd appreciate it.
That would be great. And if we then want to vote on it at the May meeting, we can do that. Or if we feel like we need to wait till June, that is also in our purview as well.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Just
yes.
one quick thing, I think, to the point maybe that Mr. Curry raised, whatever policy or guidance that you end up coming up with, there needs to be clearly defined areas that it's understood that this student representative does not participate in XYZ. And then also, there are some matters that come before y'all that, because they involve privacy issues, those kind of things we would need to, I just don't want to see any kind of a document get out there that doesn't at least recognize on its face that there are limits on this.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Estes. Absolutely. All right. This meeting is adjourned, and we will give ourselves 4 minutes to move our stuff and get busy. It is 6:34, and we are calling the Germantown Board of Education Board Business Meeting to order. We're going to begin with a moment of silence. Thank you. Mr. Curry will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. The chair is open for motion.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Landers has made the motion to approve the agenda as presented, and Mr. Curry has seconded. Ms. Subramani, would you call roll, please?
Mr. Strain,
Yes.
Ms. Landers,
Yes.
Mr. Curry,
Yes.
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is recognition and awards. Superintendent Manuel.
So I'll wait for our video to get up and running. Houston High School and Houston Middle School's basketball teams. Did it freeze and pause on us? 1 second. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and do the award, and if the video comes up, that'll still be beneficial. But tonight, first, we would like to recognize both the Houston High School and Houston Middle School's basketball teams. Both teams won their state championships this spring, which was a first for both schools. Chairman Oaf and myself treated each team to a pizza party and a remote recognition celebration because fitting all those teams here in this space would be a difficult venture. GMSD always strives to provide opportunities for students to excel beyond the classroom. We are proud when students achieve at the highest state and national levels. We are thankful for all the efforts of our coaching staff, our parents, and our students to win our first state basketball championships. With us this evening are the coaching staff from Houston Middle School. So if I call your name, would you please stand up for us? Head coach Patrick Cook. Assistant coach Darren Sharp Sr. Book and stats Michael Richmond. And their video coordinator Ralph Mitchell. Our high school coaching staff is celebrating their team at the end of the year banquet this evening, so they could not be here with us. But for the April 19th Germantown Board of Education, our television staff put together this video with highlights of their season, along with footage of our remote recognition ceremony. As you know, our coaches, our teachers, they do this because they care about kids. They care about providing opportunities for them to succeed. So tonight, we just wanted to thank our teams, our students for achieving at that high level, but also our staff for everything that they do, all the sacrifices they make to be away from their family and be there with our boys to make sure that they have an excellent opportunity. So tonight, that's our first recognition. Thank you all for everything that you did for our boys. We have a series of awards for our next recipients. Tonight, we'd like to recognize the John Travers Memorial Scholarship recipient and library dedication. John Travers began working at Houston High School in 1999. In addition to mentoring thousands of students and providing incredible, thought-provoking instruction, Mr. Travers also laid much of the groundwork that contributed to Houston High School's growth in ACT scores. He was an asset to the school and will be dearly missed. At the board meeting this evening, the district celebrates his birthday today with the awarding of his namesake memorial scholarship. The scholarship committee will present the recipient to the board tonight. The HHS administration is also here to make this special announcement. We welcome the Travers family who are in attendance this evening, and our television studio and current students put together a video for him. He was also a friend.
Originally, I wasn't even supposed to be in his class, but I told him I wanted to be in it, and through his kind heart, he went and he talked to Miss Kinney, and he got my schedule changed when he didn't have to because it was complicated. And he did it because he wanted to teach me, and his favorite thing is to, listen to students and let them be heard.
He loves teaching others and to be their best student, to be the most intelligent person that they could have been.
He really made it so we knew how big our range of possibilities were. He never let us get too hard on ourselves. He was extremely understanding with everything. He really valued that keeping our mind just in our best mental shape and knowing our worth and knowing our intelligence was going to be the best things for us. And I think that's definitely one of the biggest and best lessons I learned from him.
He valued himself on education, and he definitely thought that education was the most important thing, so you should do as much as you can to get as far as you can in your own education.
Honestly, his humor it's kind of particular. You can't take everything so serious or else you'll get offended easily. And so he kind of taught me how to make light of situations and how to just be able to kind of go with the flow and learn that it's okay to make mistakes and that you can get made fun of, but that makes you a better person, it makes you stronger.
He really made us take the world with just the most depth that we could really appreciate it in. With every experience, he made us look 10 times deeper into it. Just kind of look at the world like it was still a mystery waiting to be solved for us.
He was always striving to get us to be the best that we could be because he saw it as a waste otherwise.
He made sure that we had every resource we needed. He had a whole cabinet file with different sections of ACT test booklets that at any point he said, you guys can take these and you guys can do as many practice tests as you need. Whenever you need to, come in my classroom, it's always open for you guys. He made sure that we had everything we needed at our disposal.
He wanted to be remembered by just how he could make anyone feel welcome and how he was able to always make you feel like your ideas, even if he didn't think they were good, he always listened to them and he made you feel like it was valid for you to say what you thought.
So at this time, if the Houston High School administration team would come forward. I think they have a recognition. And then Ms. Cox, you can come up too and be with them, but then afterwards, you will be speaking on behalf of the John Travers Memorial Scholarship Committee to share with us too. So I'll turn over to the administration. Okay, it doesn't matter.
Good evening. I've honored to have been asked to speak tonight. Ms. Cox will spend a little bit more time speaking about John as an educator, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about him as a person and the effect that he's had on my life. As Mr. Manuel said, John was born on this day in Houston, Texas. His parents were both academics. Eventually, John moved to State College, Pennsylvania, when his dad took a position at Penn State. John stayed in Pennsylvania and received a bachelor's in English at Penn State. His graduate studies, however, took him to UVA, which is one of the strongest writing programs in the country, where he met Cynthia Marshall. Dr. Marshall took a teaching position at Rhodes, and the family moved to Memphis. At this point, John was working in the business world. Dr. Marshall was one of my favorite professors in college. My senior year, one of the professors in the English department hosted a party for the professors and the graduating students. Dr. Marshall went out of her way to introduce me to John because she knew I was planning on a career of teaching English at public schools. The first thing John ever said to me was, "I'm the English department chair at Kirby. Come work for me. I'll give you an honors class." I enjoyed meeting him, but I figured my education and grades would be my path to a job. And soon the school year was over, and the phone would start ringing. Well, graduation came and went, and I passed on a trip to Europe with my buddies because I wanted to be available for interviews. During this time, I worked at the pool at Rhodes and helped coach the summer swim team. One evening in late June or early July, right about the time my friends were returning from their trip, John and Dr. Marshall came to the pool. John asked me where I was teaching, and I had to admit that I hadn't heard anything yet. John took my phone number. 2 days later, I had a job at Kirby. John became my mentor, and not just for teaching. And don't get me wrong, if I had a question about grammar or usage, he was the guy I talked to. If I was struggling to get a student to reach his or her potential, John always had great advice, sage advice. John was a very private person, but one day curiosity got the better of me, and I asked why he left the business world. He said, "I realized I was signing pieces of paper that other people had already signed, and I was turning them into other people who had also signed them." John embraced his love of literature and writing and focused his considerable talents on teaching, where he thought he would have the most impact and do the most good. John was the first person I told at Kirby that I was getting married after I had proposed to Carrie. The following week, we were carpooling, and I believe John was having his old Volvo painted, and he wanted to show me the house that he had renovated all by himself, and it was very impressive. However, I think he had an alternative motive as well. The house next door to his was for sale, and he thought it would be a great starter house. The house may have been a great project for someone who had some knowledge about home repair, but I'm not that guy. Outside of knowing how to use a hammer and a screwdriver, I'm pretty worthless around the house. And I know John was really offering to help, but the job was too daunting for me at the time. The point of the story, of course, is to demonstrate John's thoughtfulness and the way he looked out for people. In 1999, when Kirby was annexed by Memphis City Schools, John and I were both excited to come to Houston to continue our careers. As I eased into teaching, my family grew. When we bought our first puppy, John was a wealth of advice. We ended up using his vet, and he also told me about the book, The Art of Raising a Puppy by the Monks of New Skeet. John claimed that he could leave a piece of chocolate cake on a coffee table and his dogs wouldn't give it a thought. Well, I read the book. Sometime after that, I discovered Patty, our Wheaton Terrier, on top of the kitchen table going to town on an entire birthday cake. I felt like a failure as a dog parent. Ironically, at Dr. Marshall's funeral, another professor made a joke about the book and quipped that the monks of New Skeet were full of beans, or something to that effect. Apparently John had shared his book with other friends, really smart friends. This is another example of John's work ethic and brilliance. John read the book, grasped the material, and resolute in putting the art of raising a puppy into practice. He succeeded where others have failed. He was truly a Renaissance man. Everything he did well. I remember the day that John asked me into his room and told me that he was going on his first date since he was in his 20s. This date was with Kathy. Apparently, John was pretty great at dating too because Kathy became his wife in about a year. I simply wanted to share a few examples of how John looked out for me over the years. My experience is not unique. As we'll hear from Ms. Cox, there are lots of examples of John going above and beyond for his friends and coworkers. This obviously extends to his students. John was loved by his students at Houston, and he loved them. John truly loved teaching. His excellence is evident in every aspect of his practice. Over the years, whenever there was an opportunity to nominate an English teacher for award, I'd proffer John's name. John would always politely decline the nomination. The work he did with his classes and students were enough for him. I won't be the same without John around, and Houston won't either. Houston will, however, continue to remember John's excellence. Out of admiration, respect, and gratitude, our library will now be named the John Travers Library. Inside, a plaque will read, "The John Travers Library, dedicated to John Ensley Travers, transformative teacher at Houston High School, 1999 to 2021. In recognition to a lifetime of commitment to the students and staff at Houston High School, Mr. Travers chose to stay in the classroom, believing that there he could have the greatest possible effect." The plaque will also include a quote from Henry David Thoreau that says, "All men want, not something to do with, but something to do, or rather something to be." And I think we heard his students speak about that on their video. I will always miss John, but every time I go to the library, I'll be happily reminded of him and inspired by his excellence. I'm proud to have known John, and I feel lucky to have been taken under his wing. I can't think of a more appropriate legacy for this great man than the scholarship that we're about to hear about and the naming of the library in his memory.
Hello, I'm Andrea Cox. John taught at HHS from 1999 until he passed away in 2020. During the course of his tenure, he taught English classes, most recently AP Language, AP Literature, AP Capstone Seminar, and even AP Government. His career was typical of most high school teachers and involved coaching at times, managing the literary magazine at times, running the 30 and above club, leading ACT administration, and mentoring young teachers. I was lucky enough to receive mentoring from John, and not a day goes by that I don't feel great appreciation for all the time and wisdom he shared with me. He was a great friend of mine and a great colleague to all. John had an enormous personality. It could fill a room quickly and leave those around him impressed and informed. There is no doubt in my mind, or his for that matter, that he was always one of the smartest people in the room. But as a fellow English teacher once told me, he never made anyone feel less than him. He was always willing to lend a helping hand, to share a teaching strategy with another colleague, or even fix broken items in the building if the occasion presented itself. What most people don't realize is that John was one of the kindest and most caring teachers that this school had ever seen. He was intensely private and didn't always want people to know how kind he really was. but I have shared stories about him with others in the building, and it is evident that his acts of service extended beyond just the students, but to the staff and school as well. I want to share a few of those acts with you all tonight. John was always a forward thinker. He wanted everything at HHS to be the best that it could possibly be. Several years ago, he helped charter the AP Capstone program at HHS. Not all schools in the area have this program. We were the second in the Shelby County area to apply for and receive the program. The program itself was exciting and innovating for our school, but John knew we could do better. He went to the administration and pushed for personal laptops for those students who enrolled in the AP Capstone seminar. This was before we were a one-to-one school. He said if we were going to do it, we needed to do it the right way. And honestly, when recruiting students for that program, the laptops were a huge part of the draw, and so the best and the brightest at Houston signed up. Our capstone program is alive and well today, thanks to the initiative of John Travers. He also understood the value in the ACT well before the Tennessee Department of Education made the test an accountability measure for the public state high schools. John took it upon himself to create the best ACT prep materials, and then he shared them with all of his colleagues. He stayed current on all the ACT updates and best practices. If you had an ACT question, he had the answer. This led him to becoming the ACT administrator at HHS, a job usually reserved for an assistant principal. He did all of this work because he knew what an essential tool our ACT program could be and used it to help put HHS on the map as one of the best public high school programs in Tennessee. We all owe a thank you to him for realizing what HHS could be instead of accepting the status quo. As I stated earlier, John was a doer of nice things, and if you were his friend, he would go out of his way for you. He was also hilarious and was never afraid to speak his mind. Here are a few anecdotes from my colleagues. Once I was attacked by a loose dog while walking my dog in my neighborhood. After I told John, he brought me a dog pepper spray can to carry with me in case it ever happened again. John and I worked together for 15 years, and he taught both of our daughters. We loved him as a teacher, a colleague, and a friend. Not sure why, but we started to salute each other in the hallways. This turned into a salute accompanied with a spirited exchange of our last names. Tingle, Travers. We constantly ragged on each other just for fun, and laughing at ourselves is what made our friendship work. I had a friend in John Travers. He was a magnificent human and one of a kind. We miss him tremendously. He is what I would call an academic redwood. The guy was a pillar of education and the type of teacher we should all strive to be. John would hate me for telling this. After school about a decade ago, Travers saved my bacon by sharing his stipend for sponsoring the Lit Mag. He just walked in and gave me half of his pay and walked out. And oh yeah, he paused to give me clear warning that I tell no one. He could not afford for anyone to find out that he was a nice guy. His words, not mine. Yes, I mentored him, but with no expectation and certainly not $2 worth. As he left the room, my phone rang and my frantic daughter said that we owed a room fee at the U of M, and it was due today, and I was broke, and the fee was $200. I will always appreciate his generosity and for being a ram in the bush. He killed mice in my classroom, personally, and other critters. He unlocked the doors for all teachers around him early in the morning. His funny stories will live on long after he is gone, and these simple yet kind acts were sprinkled all around Houston High with no expectation of anything in return. He is simply irreplaceable. John loved teaching, and he was truly invested in making his class an environment conducive for learning. He wanted all of his students to feel welcome and comfortable, and if you had ever stepped into his room, you would believe it. It was like a modern-day Lyceum house, with comfortable chairs, lamp-lit tables, built-in bookshelves filled with all sorts of texts, hot coffee brewing, and phone charging stations. This type of environment was all financed on his own dime. Most teachers won't or can't spend that kind of money making a classroom feel so cozy, but he knew how to make the students feel at home, and this feeling would allow for optimal conversations. He loved talking to the students and challenging them to think about literature and the world around them in a critical manner. He made it his mission to teach students to pay attention to the outside world around them and notice how everything is connected. Yes, he was an excellent writing teacher, but what he was really skilled at was opening the eyes of those around him. He allowed students to comfortably find their voice and then use it for good. I spent the last 5 years of my teaching career working alongside him teaching AP language. Critical thinking skills were at the heart of all of his lessons, academic or life. These critical thinking skills had a major impact on so many people. John wanted to see those skills put to good use, so he wished for an HHS student to receive a scholarship each year, and the student who stood out as an excellent writer and critical thinker. Laura Smith fits this description to a T. I taught Laura AP language last year, and I was blown away by her intelligence, poise, and writing ability. John was her AP capstone seminar teacher. He and I talked about Laura's gifts on many occasions. And when the John Travers Memorial Scholarship Committee met this year, Laura was an easy student to choose. She has the ability to remove her own personal beliefs and look at a complex situation through a thoughtful yet unbiased lens. I'm proud to call her a former student, and I know that John would feel the same. He thought very highly of her and wanted to see her grow.
So, congratulations to be the first recipient of this award, and if you would come up and we can get your photo, we are thankful for you. Y'all want to meet her in the middle? Thank you for allowing us the time tonight to remember someone truly special to GMSD and to Houston High School. At this time, if you want to leave, if you were here for recognition and awards, please feel free to do so. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but thank you all.
Thank you for allowing us a moment to compose ourselves. We move to the item on the agenda of reports. We have our TLN update. Mr. Strain, if you would give us our TLN update, please.
Before I get into that, Mr. Travers was actually my honors English teacher in 11th grade, and 1999 to 2000, so I guess that would have been his first year teaching. And he really was an amazing teacher and person, really made you think. He was really a joy to be with. And I told the board this kind of when we learned he had passed, unfortunately. But what really stuck out to me, again, he would kind of go off topic now and then, which were some of the more fun moments. But he mentioned that, and this really stuck with me, he said one of his favorite things to do was to drive his daughter to friends' houses, things like that, with just the two of them in the car, because it gave him an opportunity to speak with her and just spend time with her. And that has stuck with me ever since. I thought about that even before I had kids. And I try to think about that when my kids are in the car with me now, and just turn the radio off and talk with them. And so I credit Mr. Travers with that. So it is it's unbelievably sad to lose such an amazing man, but I'm glad that his legacy lives on through the scholarship and the renaming of the library. Governor Lee released an amended budget last week. As it relates to education, the budget includes funding for the special session education bills, including $18.5 million in non-recurring funds for student transportation to summer learning and literacy programs, $250 million to invest in a trust fund for mental health supports, $25 million in funds dedicated to Tennessee Promise for scholarships, funding for Governor Lee's Basic Education Program, or BEP, hold harmless legislation, and $2 million to provide additional high-quality books and resources over the summer for rising first graders. Unfortunately, BEP ratios were not adjusted, meaning funds were not appropriated for additional school nurses, social workers, counselors, or RTI positions proposed in multiple bills this session. Regarding the K-12 Mental Health Trust Fund, an estimated $6 to $10 million in annual interest earned from the fund's investment will support mental health efforts in schools. The General Assembly's education committees closed last week, meaning it is unlikely the committees will consider any additional education legislation this session. However, education-related legislation continues to make its way through other relevant committees. Some of that legislation includes Senate Bill 774, which provides a district's BEP calculation for the 2021-2022 school year must not be less than the district's BEP calculation for the 2020-2021 school year. Senate Bill 739, which establishes the K-12 Mental Health Trust Fund Act. Per the Act, funds are available to the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in consultation with the Department of Education for mental or behavioral health services for K through 12 students. Senate Bill 788 / House Bill 1305, which requires each district to conduct an open enrollment period of at least 30 days during which a parent or guardian of a student residing in the district may apply for an enrollment of the parent's or guardian's student in a school the district is not zoned to attend. A district must enroll all current students before allowing out-of-district students to enroll. And House Bill 1233, which requires public schools to provide a reasonable accommodation to a person who is unwilling or unable to use a multi-occupancy restroom or changing facility designated for the person's sex, defined as a person's biological sex determined at the time of birth. In federal news, last month, the U.S. Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which includes significant federal funding for counties, cities, and school districts. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Strain. Next on the agenda is the chairman's report. First, I would like to thank Alderman Brian Ulicki for attending our meeting this evening. Mr. Strain reports he volunteered during GMSD's second vaccination day, held a call with Shelby County Schools board member regarding recent legislation, assisted GEF with packing, Germantown Education Foundation, with packing shirts for the GMSD Stampede, and attended Dogwood's PTO meeting, the GEF Principal Toyota Teacher of the Year Award ceremony, with Ms. Cox being the winner. She was here earlier. The board's budget work session and the NSBA annual conference. He also tried to keep up with his kindergartner while running the GMSD Stampede 5K. Ms. Landers reports she volunteered for the Germantown Education Foundation in preparing for the GMSD Stampede and attended the NSBA annual conference and the board's budget work session. Mr. Curry reports he attended the Forest Hill Elementary PTO March meeting and the spring general meeting, the Houston High School theater productions of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, the board's budget work session, and the Germantown Education Foundation Principal Toyota Teacher of the Year ceremony. He also viewed various modules of the NSBA's annual conference. Ms. Griffith reports she attended the Houston High School's Arts Facilities Committee meeting, the GMSD Grading Committee meeting, the NSBA Annual Convention, and the Germantown Education Foundation Principal Toyota Teacher of the Year award ceremony. She presented to the Riverdale PTO Board and Houston Middle School PTO Board. She volunteered at the 2nd District Staff Vaccination Site and participated in the GMSD Stampede. Ms. Oaf reports she completed the TSBA's School Leadership Online Series, volunteered during GMSD's 2nd Vaccination Day, and communicated with constituents regarding various topics. She attended the recognition events for the state champion HMS and HHS boys basketball teams, as we saw earlier, the Germantown Education Foundation Principal Toyota Teacher of the Year ceremony, and Houston High School's theater productions of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, as well as the NSBA's annual conference. Sean Aker, one of the NSBA's speakers, said in one of our conferences, "Happiness is not an individual sport." Think about that for a minute. As I reviewed this past month and considered his words, I saw a common thread. From celebrating our state champion basketball teams to watching the casts of our outstanding theater department joyfully perform on stage, our students, teachers, and families are creating community in many ways. More evidence of community is the record-setting participation in the GMSD virtual Stampede. Families and friends having fun, running and walking all over our town to benefit our students. Thank you to Robin Rudisil, Andy Martin, and the Germantown Education Foundation for the incredible work you accomplished, rallying the community in support of our schools. Earlier this month, our board was able to participate in the National School Board Association's annual conference for the very first time. Although it was virtual, we were able to interact with fellow board members and educational leaders from around North America. We exchanged ideas, we learned new strategies, we commiserated on common struggles, and we shared our uniting passion, our students. In short, we grew our community. As we diligently work toward the end of the school year and pray for continued progress against COVID-19, I hope that we keep the immense appreciation for community that has come as a result of this strange year of distancing. Because Charlie Brown is right. Happiness is singing together when the day is through, and happiness is those who sing with you. That is the chairman's report. Now for the financial report.
Okay, we will start with the balance sheet that you have attached and that you were also sent. So we'll start with the school operating account. Assets total, $26.5 million. Liabilities total for that account, $150,000. The ending fund balance is $26.4 million. In the federal account, we had assets totaling $39,000. The liabilities was the same amount of money. The ending fund balance of that account was $0. In the cafeteria account, we had the assets totaling $254,000, liabilities totaling $214,000. The ending fund balance for the cafeteria account was $39,000. In the capital projects account, there was $688,000 in assets total, liabilities of $18,000. The ending fund balance was $669,000. In the health insurance account, we had $2.6 million in assets total. Liabilities was $447,000. The ending fund balance was $2.2 million. In the OPEB trust account, we had $4.1 million. Liabilities totaling $28,000. The ending fund balance for that account was $4.1 million. And in the general fixed asset account, we had $115,878,000. The ending fund balance was the same. When you look at our school operating fund, so we'll switch to the operating fund document. In the regular instruction account, the budget was $30.9 million. Year to date, we have spent $20.1 million for an expenditure of 64.9%. In alternative education, the budget was $309,000. Year to date, we have spent $192,000, so we're at 62% of expenditures for that account. Special education, the budget was $4.7 million. Year to date, we have spent $3.1 million in that account. We're at 66.85% expenditure for that account. In the CTE account, we are at $1.25 million. Year to date, we have spent $807,000. The expenditure is 64.46%. In the attendance and planning account, we have spent $711,000, or the budget was $711,000. Year to date, we've spent $497,000 for an expenditure of 69.85%. In health services, we had a budget of $549,000. The year to date was $345,000 for an expenditure of 62.8%. In other student support and guidance, a budget was $1.2 million. Year to date, we have spent $790,000, expenditure of 64.27%. In the regular instruction account, we've spent budgeted $2.3 million. Year to date, we have spent $1.5 million, so for a 65.08% expended. Special ed support, $1.6 million budgeted. Year to date, $1.137 spent, 68% spent in that account. Career and technical, we had a budget of $30,000. Year to date, we have spent $17,000 out of the account for an expenditure of 57%. Technology, the budget was $1.9 million. Year to date, we have spent $1.37, and that's an expenditure of 69%. Board of Education, we had budgeted $2 million. We have spent $1.8 year to date for an 87% expenditure. Superintendent account was budgeted $700,000. Year to date, we have spent $467,000 for an expenditure of 66.67%. Office of the Principal, we had budgeted $3.9 million. Year to date, we have spent $2.7. That's an expenditure of 69%. For fiscal services, we have spent $629,000. We had budgeted $629,000. Year to date, we have spent $457,000 out of that account. We're at a 72% expenditure in that account. Human resources, we had budgeted $498,000. Year to date, we have spent $351,000 for an expenditure of 70%. Operation of the plant, we're at $3.1 million budgeted. Year to date, we have spent $1.9. That's a 62% expenditure. Maintenance of the plant, we have budgeted $1.4 million. Year to date, we have spent just over $1 million. We're at an expenditure of 72.89. Transportation, we had budgeted $1.7 million. Year to date, we have expended $1.1 million for an expenditure of 61%. In the safety account, we had budgeted $38,000, and we have spent $28,000. That's an expenditure of 73.84%. And then capital outlay, we have budgeted $4.1 million. We have spent $1.3 million, and that's an expenditure of 32%. So the overall highlights of those accounts. The administrative and support categories, we have spent 75%. Instructional categories, we have spent 67%. Total expenditures at 64% of the total budgeted. There was a $150,000 increase in the fund balance for the month. Our cafeteria reported a net income of $34,000, and I think this is incredible news. Our OPEB account year-to-date has unrealized gains on investment of $545,000. So a strong budget for our retirees' post-employment benefits. And that concludes the financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. Now it's time for the superintendent's report.
And so
Why
now
don't
we're
you take
transitioning to the superintendents. Give me a second to get a sip
Take
of
a
water.
sip of water first.
So we have embarked on the process of preparing our budget. At this time, we still don't have our first revenue projection from the state, so we have the cart before the horse a little bit, but we're trying to meet our guidelines to get our budget approved. So I'm going to give some overview highlights of what the board had seen during our budget session, and that'll be the primary content of my superintendent's report. So we have three major sources of revenue. Those are the state of Tennessee, Shelby County government, and city of Germantown. You can see where they are there. It's pretty equal, 49% coming from BEP funding. That's based on average daily membership from the previous year, so that's a year in the rears. We have county taxes at 43%, and it's a culmination of county taxes. And then we have the requirement for the city to pay that is a component there too. So we're going to highlight those revenues. So know that this is the first year since we have been a district that we have not seen an increase in student populations. So know that BEP funds, which is our primary driver for our accounts, that's a concern for us. Last year, our average daily membership was 6,000 students. We're at 59,000. We're not predicting a reduction, but for budget purposes, the revenue is neutral for our state funds, and that's 50% of our funding. When we look at technology, we did have a positive increase. We have seen an increase of $358,000 in revenues, and so that helps us balance our budget also. So here's an overview of our budget revenue. You can see county taxes, that includes sale and property, but the increases that you see in the county tax line, that's the 404 account. That's primarily due to our increases in sales tax in the county and state. It has been a strong year for sales taxes. When we look at property tax, we have not projected an increase in property tax because we haven't seen that yet. But if your appraisals were like mine, I'm going to be paying more in property taxes for my house in Germantown. So that may be a positive variance for the district around property taxes, and so we should see that in the future. When we look at other local revenue, that's where you're seeing that technology increase coming in. That's $644,000 over the previous year budget. That's a positive variance. And then the state education funds, we're predicting the same amount of funding because we did not have an increase in enrollment of students. And so we think we will see one next year, but like I said, that's funded a year in the rears. We're getting paid for last year's students. We won't go through each of the categories, but the board has seen the number of positions. This is where we spend the majority of our budget. Over 80% is in people. So no, that's where we should put our funding, not in things. So you can see the number of persons budgeted in each category, and this will be online too. But we'll go quickly through some of the highlights and tie it to our strategic plan. Know that last year we were predicting a budget shortfall because we weren't sure of what was going to happen with sales tax, how COVID was going to affect our district. So we did create a very lean and tight budget. We knew that it was not a textbook adoption year, so we used the textbook account to buy consumables, Wit and Wisdom, Eureka, so we have reestablished that funding. So in that account, you see an increase of $514,000 because we also have a textbook adoption year this year, and we have to continue to buy those consumables that our students use. Same thing's true for assessments. We had cut this account in order to prepare a balanced budget based on what we thought was going to be a reduction in sales tax. We did not see that come to fruition. Another increase in cost is extended school year for our students who might show regression during the summertime or during breaks. We provide that services for students. There's an increase in that count of $118,000. And then also there's an increase in software costs, standards-based software that increased by $33,000. But all these tie to us providing engaging, challenging, and innovative academics for our students. Here's an example of where we saw some of those changes. Like I said, we used textbook money to balance the budget last year because it was not a large textbook adoption year. So in the fiscal year budget 21, you saw $250,000 budgeted for our consumables. This year, that has returned to its previous amount, so we're at $764,000 for consumables. So you can see the list of things that are included there. Eureka Math, Wit and Wisdom workbooks, Studies Weekly, Saxon Phonics, Mountain Math, all those things that students are bringing home or working with in their classrooms. Other increases, like I mentioned, in fiscal year 21 on supplies material, these are assessments and student data pieces. That increased from $30,000 to $169,000. This is our benchmark testing that we do regularly on our students, Mastery Connect, Easy CBM. A lot of those help identify skill deficits in students. STAR Early Literacy Assessments, the ACT, the Iowa Placement Test that we provide students. Know that all those are included in this category, and that's why we see that increase. Around the whole child, Ms. Griffith, as you mentioned during our work session, this is going to be a whole budgeting process in and of itself. We are receiving substantial funding from ESSER 3.0 that's to be used to meet student needs. And so know that we are going to come with a budget to talk about how we are modifying and changing our whole child programs in our schools and really providing those supports for students post-pandemic. So as they come back, how are we going to prepare for them and really meet their needs? So you're going to see those changes. We're going to present those to the board and gather your input about how you want to see us move as a district. So that's to be determined. Under the recruit, develop, and retain exemplary staff, know that the primary increase that we're seeing in budgets, in all of our budgets, is around people. Know that for all of our salaries, we pay increased amounts. It equates to about a 2%, but it's not the same every single year. That's what it averages out to be. But that is a step increase. So as they're here, as they stay with the district longer and work for us, we do see that increase. So in this budget, you do see an increase of $411,000 that's spread out through all the budgets for our step increases for staff. And there are 61 different salary schedules, it said there on the statement, because we have so many different types of positions in the district. So also, too, one thing that I think we are proud of, we do not make just the minimum contribution for OPEB. That's other post-employment benefits. So know that when people retire from the district, they get to carry the health insurance with them. That's a snowball that grows. And so you've heard of cities and municipalities that fold because they're not preparing for the retirements, for the OPEB benefits for their employees. We have been fully funding that account since we've been created as a district. And you heard today, it is strong, and we are seeing the gains on that account. So we will be able to provide for those employees in the future. Know that early on the board did decide we closed that door, so new employees do not receive that benefit, but it's the legacy employees that were with the district. Can we go back one page? There was more thing on that page. No, sorry, go forward. Okay, yes. And last but not least, we made a difficult decision as a district to provide our own health insurance for our employees. And since we have been a district, there has been no increase in our health insurance costs for our staff. That's an incredible accomplishment when you think about what people have experienced in their health insurance accounts. That is a benefit for our employees so that as they receive steps, as they receive cost of living adjustments, it's not going out the other door to pay for their health insurance. We have maintained that strong account. So we are very proud of that decision and the fact that there will be no increase again this year. It's a point of celebration for the district. Resource management, know that we did add extra positions because of having the virtual school or virtual options for students and also having the in-person options. We're not staffed like that by the state, so you do see a reduction in those positions. We are able to accommodate that through retirements this year, so you will not see people who lose their positions because they were hired because of the pandemic. We saw an increase in our transportation contract with Durham that the board previously approved, and we have budgeted for increases in diesel costs. Technology software enhancements, you see some increases in those expenditures by $48,000, and then we increased legal services by $50,000 to make sure that we have some legal counsel here during the day on a regular basis. So we also continued funding for our communications and our partnerships. We are going to do a publication that we are going to send out to the community so that people will know about the many accomplishments of our district. So that will continue. So you'll see those coming soon. And that concludes the superintendent's report on budget. I went quickly. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you, Superintendent Manuel. Next on the agenda is citizens to be heard. Ms. Subramani, are there any other than you've already provided? No. Okay. We have 2 citizens to be heard this evening. Before I call them forward, I have the guidelines to read. GMSD, by its policy, allows persons to address the board during the Citizens to be Heard section of its agenda, but only within certain guidelines. Tennessee law makes no specific provisions for the participation of the public at school board meetings. Thus, there is no inherent or legal right of citizens to make comments during a school board meeting. Prior to making your remarks, you must state your name, address, and the subject of your presentation. If there are several persons who are intending to express the same sentiment, GMSD board rules require that you designate one spokesperson to speak for your position. If you do not do so, and the chair determines that comments made are cumulative, the chair will direct the speaker to cease their remarks. Individuals addressing the board shall address their remarks to the chair. Speakers will not be permitted to engage in gossip, make defamatory comments, or use abusive or vulgar language. In accordance with GMSD policy, School Board or SB 1.404, remarks will be limited to 3 minutes unless time is extended by the board or otherwise reduced by the chairman to reflect the number of citizens to be heard. TCA 3917-306 provides that it is a Class B misdemeanor to intentionally prevent or disrupt a school board meeting. Please be advised that any individual who is disruptive or does not adhere to the aforementioned rules will not be permitted to continue and make their remarks at this meeting. The first citizen to be heard is J.P. Archer. If you would approach the podium. That's fine. Mary Jane, if you want to, Mary Jane Archer, is that correct? Okay, come on up, and if you would come to the podium, and when you push the little button, the light will turn green, and that way we'll be able to hear you.
All right, thank you so much. It's a privilege to get to share, to get to come and talk to you tonight. My name is Mary Jane Archer. I live at 2991 Devonshire Cove in Germantown, and my husband and I are parents of a 4th grader here at Forest Hill. And my topic is asking our school to give back the freedom to breathe freely to our kids. Tonight I'm urging the school board and its members to please lift the mask mandate at Forest Hill and allow mask wearing to be optional for everyone. In speaking with several people in the community, including the mayor of Germantown, everyone says the same thing, that the mask mandate comes from the Shelby County Health Department and they have no power to oppose these non-elected public servants. The science behind mask wearing in regards to protecting and preventing the spread of COVID-19 is being recklessly ignored. Our children's health is not their priority, or they would have had long since lifted the mandate imposed on our schools. And there are many negative effects of mask wearing that I want to highlight tonight. Number one, children in our schools, they need to see expression in the classroom, which are greatly hindered by mask wearing. Nonverbal communication is 90% of communicating. We learn to interpret so many cues from each other's faces. 2, hygiene. A personal friend that is a frequent substitute here at the school shared with me how dirty and disgusting some kids' masks are. Kids chewing on them, sneezing in them, dropping them on the bathroom floor, stepping on them and putting them back on their face, clearly unsanitary. 3, the behavioral problems and bullying is going on. My own son has been told to pull up his mask or he'll be told on. He's been told that if he pays a certain amount of money to a student, then he will not be told on. And he's even come home telling me that a kid said to him, maybe one day I'll let you breathe without making you pull up your mask. Psychologically, this is obviously not healthy. Proper oxygen level, essential for the development of organs like the brain, liver, and lungs, and we have no idea what damage could be done, could be happening to our children growing that are breathing less than a healthy amount of oxygen through the many hours of their school day. And lastly, and extremely important for you to understand, is that scientists and doctors have known for decades that masks do not keep out respiratory viruses and with children nor adults. Saying masks help stop the spread of a respiratory virus is a new narrative being used for the first time in history, and it simply isn't true, and the truth is being censored. An example is a recent Stanford study Stanford University study that was posted in the National Center for Biological Information government website, an extremely credible source, is being completely ignored by our county and school officials. 0 mainstream media outlets have reported the study, and big tech is actually suspending people's accounts who post the study. Why? Because the study is conclusive, stating the data suggests that both medical and non-medical face masks are ineffective to block human-to-human transmission of viral and infectious diseases such as SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. We parents should not have to wait for the Shelby County Health Department to allow our children to breathe freely at school. This freedom has been taken from them without parental consent, and even the designated mask breaks that they have in the classroom are really make as much sense as having a designated pee area in a swimming pool. I'm really asking you to stand up and make the decision to do what's right for our children now and no longer wait any longer. The science supports this. Healthy children should not be muzzled at school. Please make masks voluntary and not mandatory for our children. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Archer. Mr. Archer? I'll start the 3 minutes once you give your name and your address.
Okay, my name is J.P. Archer. I am her husband. What she neglected to tell you was that we also have kids that are going to Houston High School as well, in addition to this one as well. Still 2991 Devonshire, we're living together. And I'm gonna piggyback on what she said in a different angle a little bit. Everybody hear me okay? Appropriate, okay. So I began getting a bio degree, virology, studied virology, microbiology, genetics, all that stuff that would allow me to really look into all this stuff. After that, I went a different road. I became a fighter pilot in the Marine Corps. For 22 years, I've defended this nation, done combat missions over Iraq, Afghanistan, flown all around the world. And I can tell you that for the first time in my entire life, right now, in 2020, is the first time that I've ever been fearful about the direction of our country and what's happening to it right now. I've talked standing here before the school board, I've talked before all of the health directors at Houston High School or at Houston, talked to teachers, talked to principals, and they all say the same thing. I agree with what you're saying about the masks, but this is Shelby County's orders. There's nothing I can do. I'm just following orders. And I can't even believe what I'm hearing when I say that. You are given this incredible responsibility to take care of our children, to protect them, to mold them into being these individuals. And the responsibility of that is incredible. And instead what is happening is you're essentially teaching them to be slaves. These muzzles that are on them, you're teaching them that a couple of non-elected Shelby County officials can take away your most basic right to breathe without giving any scientific data whatsoever. If that's not teaching somebody to be a slave, I don't know what is. And we're just standing and taking it. I want you to know a little history refresher here. In World War II, the Nazis used a corrupt media, which they completely controlled, and the medical field to enact their agenda. They went after, at first, they just went after the mentally handicapped and mentally disabled people. Once they got the ball rolling, steam rolling, once they got the people to all kind of chime in and get on board with what they were doing, that's when they went after the Jews. And they killed 6 million of them before it was over. At the end of that, when we ended up putting them back down, the Nuremberg trials held them accountable. In the Nuremberg trials, when they talked to these lieutenants, these captains that were doing all this, they asked them, why did you do that? How'd you do that? And they all said the same thing. I was just following orders. There was nothing I could do. Does that sound familiar? We are in a spot that is so crazy in our country right now. The truth will come out. And I don't know if you guys truly believe what is actually going on here, the lies that are coming from Comrade Fauci and the media right now. But what I hear when I hear the health director say there's nothing that I can do, I don't have the courage to stand up and do what's right. And that is scary to me. I hear that I don't have the backbone to protect the children, which is the job that I'm supposed to do. So if we don't stand up to Shelby County right now, I guarantee you, Fauci has already said there's this ghost that can't be, that you cannot detect this new virus. There's another variant that's out there you can't detect. You don't even know if you have it. And I guarantee you, come November, fall, when we go back to school, we are still going to be wearing masks. They're going to up the ante somehow. I implore you, beg you, stop the masks. We need to stand up to Shelby County, and we need to stand up for what's right and follow the science.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is the consent agenda, number 8 on the agenda. The consent agenda includes the approval of the minutes, the annual review and revision of policies second reading, annual review revision of policies first reading, miscellaneous fiscal year 2021 budget amendments 31, 32, and 33. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve all items in the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion is made by Ms. Landers and seconded by Mr. Strain. Ms. Subramani, if you would call roll.
Ms. Landers,
Yes.
Mr. Curry,
Yes.
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Mr. Strain,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passed. We move on to board action items. The first action item is approval of grant of tenure to recommended teachers. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the grant of tenure to the recommended teachers.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion to approve the grant of tenure to recommended teachers was made by Ms. Griffith and seconded by Ms. Landers. Is there discussion?
Being a new board member, we go through TSBA training, the School Board Association for Tennessee, and one of the things they emphasize is the importance of the tenure vote for teachers. This is something that's the first time for me to be able to participate in this. I can say that seeing some of the teachers on the list, both directly and indirectly, it's an honor for me to be able to vote yes for tenure. I'm very happy that I get to participate in this process to honor our teachers that do such good work for our district and that have met their time. And I'm just very glad to be able to participate in this, and I'm very honored to vote yes.
Any other comments or discussion?
What an amazing group of teachers. It's an honor to get to consider this. I think it's also telling just when you speak to members of the community and say, so-and-so is, up for tenure now. And I remember getting one response from a friend of, we love her. My child cried at the end of last year when, students didn't go back to school because they missed her so much. And that's the kind of teachers that we have here. And so thank you, and it's an honor to consider this.
I just want to thank Mrs. Stratton for the presentation during the work session. I'm mindful, too. I always appreciate that when we see this list, there are fresh young teachers that have been with us since the beginning, right out of school. And then there are those who have earned tenure in other districts. And yet they've come to be part of the GMSD family and had to go through the process in order to do that here with us. And so as I see that mixture on these lists every year, I get really excited just about what we do to bring those folks together. And as everybody's previously mentioned, just what an honor it is to participate in this process at this level. Thank you again.
I will say after the vote, if it passes, that the celebration of tenure will be occurring in May for these teachers at the next school board meeting. Ms. Subramani, if you would call roll.
Mr. Curry,
Yes.
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Mr. Strain,
Yes.
Ms. Landers,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passed. We move on to this 9B, nominations for 2021 TSBA Volunteer and Student Awards. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the nomination of Kelly Yates for the 2021 TSBA Volunteer Award and the nomination of Emma Grace Benzing for the 2021 TSBA Student Award.
Second.
The motion to approve the nomination of Kelly Yates for the 2021 TSBA Volunteer Award and the nomination of Emma Grace Benzing for the 2021 TSBA Student Award was made by Mr. Curry and seconded by Ms. Landers. The chair will entertain discussion.
Say again, what a great group of nominees. I don't know how either of these individuals have time to do everything that we heard about today, and so we're happy to look at this, and good luck to them going forward.
If I may, Emma Grace is serving as a student representative on the grading committee that I'm serving on as a board member, and it didn't take about 10 minutes of her speaking, and I was immediately, I think I might have expressed this to Mr. Gillespie, I would give her my proxy sitting up here any day and feel really confident in that. Just to know what all the student and parent activities, like you say, just reading this description is phenomenal, and I really think that they have a chance to go all the way, and I hope that they're both with us in November when we're at TSBA State Convention.
Ms. Subramani, if you would call roll.
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Mr. Strain,
Yes.
Ms. Landers,
Yes.
Mr. Curry,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passed. We move to 9C, fire alarm system replacement at Houston High School. The chair is open for a motion.
I move to approve the purchase and installation of a new fire alarm system at Houston High School and award the contract to Johnson Controls in the amount of $567,264.
Second.
The motion was made to approve the purchase and installation of a new fire alarm system at Houston High School and award the contract to Johnson Controls in the amount of $567,264. $567,264. Whatever's going on.
You're making me feel better about my.
Yeah, thank you. That was my goal. And that amount was made by Mr. Strain and seconded by Ms. Griffith. Is that correct? Sorry, all those numbers threw me off. The board we are open for discussion.
I think it just should be noted that while this was on the list to occur, in a few years from now, this is being moved up due to a lightning strike that took out the old system. So it does give us the opportunity to put in a updated system at our high school.
I think it also is important to note that an insurance claim has been filed and made, and anything that could be recovered as a result of that would be helpful. So I appreciate that being pointed out as well.
I think it's also important to point out that students are safe and the fire alarms do work. Just, we need to fix the problems that exist, so it's not. It's just, yes, the fire alarms still work. Please don't think they don't. Ms. Subramani, if you would take roll, please.
Mr. Strain,
Yes.
Ms. Landers.
Yes.
Mr. Curry,
Yes.
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passed. We're on to 9D. The GMSD fiscal year 2021-2022 general fund budget, first reading. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the GMSD FY 2021-2022 general fund budget after first reading.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion was made to approve the GMSD fiscal year 2021-2022 general fund budget for first reading, by Ms. Landers and seconded by Ms. Griffith. Is there discussion?
I'll just compliment the work session we had. I thought it was very informative, answered so many questions and issues, so thank you to the cabinet for preparing that.
And I'll just.
And Mr. Manuel.
Yeah. And I'll just reiterate that this is not there are not a lot of new initiatives in this budget. This is a lean budget, almost a continuation budget. We're just providing steps essentially for our staff that are included in their pay schedules because we're not seeing an increase in BEP dollars from the state at this time.
Ms. Subramani, if you would call roll.
Ms. Landers?
Yes.
Mr. Curry?
Yes.
Ms. Griffith?
Yes.
Mr. Strain?
Yes.
Ms. Wolf?
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passed. We are now on to announcements. Coming this weekend is the opening of the second cast of Charlie Brown at Houston High School Theater, and the opening of the Marvelous Wonderettes. Also this weekend. The schedule you can probably find on the Houston High School Facebook page. It is a little confusing, so I do suggest you look at it if you're trying to find a particular show to watch. The May 13th is the graduate walk at all GMSD schools. I am so excited that we are starting this, and I hope that this is something that we are going to do annually for our graduates and for our elementary schools. May 14th is Houston High School graduation in person at Bellevue Baptist Church. Yes, I'm so excited about that. May 17th is our next board meeting. And just in case people don't know this and aren't sure, May 21st is the last day of school. So mark your calendars. This meeting is adjourned.